Hi, this is International Master Jacek Stopa. Today I'm going to talk about the Evans Gambit with a focus on variations arising after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, b4, bishop takes b4, c3, and three moves. Bishop c5, bishop e7, and bishop d6. I'm going to start with the move bishop c5, which is a very logical option. It's not seen as often as the other options like bishop a5 or bishop e7 mainly, or bishop d6 also, still a little less popular option, but nonetheless it's a worthwhile move to look at. Bishop c5, white plays d4, a very logical move. We are seizing the center. E takes d4, and now the most logically looking c takes d4 is not the move, not the best move in this position, because black gets this additional option bishop b4 with a check. So we take advantage of a trick here and castle instead. And in this position, black cannot really capture on c3. Why do you think that is the case? Okay, so some of you probably think it's the move queen d5 with the double attack, but that's not the move, because right now black can defend both weak points at the same time with queen e7. Right, but instead, very typical shot, bishop f7. Now we're making the same double attack with a check. Right, so check, bishop is hanging. King doesn't really have a better square to go to than e8. Bishop takes c5 with a fantastic compensation. We're about to collect the c3 pawn. King is permanently discastled. White has better development. Big advantage in this position. Here, after castling, black typically chooses two options, either d6 or d3. And let me look at those options in turn. After d6, we obviously take on d4, bishop b6, and in this position, I think the best move is d5. However, another interesting option is definitely knight c3, right? Very logical, we're sticking to our center. Down a pawn, but again, compensation in development, space, and like I mentioned, the center. Or also, queen b3 is an option. Now possibly transitioning into the bishop a5 line after queen e7. But black does get this additional option, knight a5. Now, if we want to take the pawn after king f8, the position will end up with black being up a piece, as there is no way to stick to the bishop, right? Queen is hanging. After queen d5, black can just play knight f6, and we cannot defend the bishop anymore. So we're not going to take on f7 and play queen a4 instead. Now bishop d7 and bishop b5, but in this position, black doesn't really have any problems. That's why I recommend the move d5, which gives white better chances here in this position. And now there is three possible options here for black. Let's first look at the enticingly looking queen f6, right? Exposed diagonal. That's actually a dubious option. Now after d takes c6 and queen a1, white gets two moves which give a clear advantage. So how about you guys try to figure out one of those moves? Or both. Okay, so white can play here queen b3, attacking the pawn and creating the threat bishop b2, a queen trap. Now if queen f6, bishop b2, queen g6, knight h4, queen h5, and bishop g7 gives a close to a winning advantage. Another option is the move bishop f7 with the idea that after king f7, queen b3 check. Now if bishop e6, then we have knight g5. And if king goes somewhere, then bishop d2 traps the queen, and again it's over. So queen f6 is not really a viable option for black. A better move is the move knight e5. Now bishop b2, right, taking advantage of the diagonal, so black cannot really capture here on c4 because that will be met with bishop g7. Or in many cases, after moves like knight c4 where the bishop is hanging, there is always queen a4. Right, so queen a4 and also check, and attacking the knight on c4 takes the piece back. So bishop b2 f6 and knight bd2. We're down a pawn, but again, really nice compensation. There is space issues here, and there is a way to exert some pressure here on the queen side with the moves a4 threatening a5. In some cases where this bishop here gets traded for the knight will be able to later on capture the bishop on b6, leaving the unpleasant structure b7, b6, a5 in some possible endgame. So here again, white is fine. And the move knight a5 is also perfectly playable. And after knight a5, e5. There's obviously some other moves to be considered here. One option is again bishop b2 with the threat taking on g7, or bishop d3. We're withdrawing the bishop. In some cases we're going to be playing against the knight on a5. Right, clearly isolated piece. Again, we have strong development. We already castled. Black has to still worry about castling the king safely. After moves like queen f6 at this point, there is always e5. D takes e5, and now the bishop b2 or rook e1 also looks fine. Okay. Another option here for black on move 7 is the move d3. After d3, queen d3 is fine, but I think better chances poses the move knight g5. Right? It's more aggressive, there is an immediate threat, and two ways to defend the pawn for black. Knight e5 or knight h6. Which one do you think is more logical? Right, so knight h6 is a better move because in some cases black will need the rook from h8 to play. There's also going to be the option of an artificial castle. Well, I guess you guys need to see what happens after knight h6 to really see the difference between knight h6 and knight e5. Okay, but The main reason why we're playing knight h6, not knight e5 with black here is that we're developing another piece. So white takes on f7, knight takes, bishop takes f7, king f7, and the double attack, which is the point of the whole variation. Queen h5 check. Now king has to go, for instance, to f8. Queen takes c5, d6, and queen b5. And here in this position, again, white's compensation is mainly dependent on the black king, which is going to have hard time castling. There are some options for an artificial castle, but again, that takes time. And when you look at this position, here white is having fun for free as the pawn on d3 will be falling. So equal material, I would say it's an edge. It's a slight edge for white here. Now here, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, b4, bishop takes, c3. Let's talk about the option bishop e7. I would say this is a second most popular move after the move bishop a5 on move 5, and it definitely deserves attention. The main option for white here is d4. However, queen b3 is also playable. So I'll primarily focus on the move d4, but let me talk a little bit about the move queen b3 also. After queen b3, there is pretty much one logical option for black, knight h6, and d4. The idea of the move that first we are forcing the knight here on this not very convenient square, and now the knight is under attack. We're putting some pressure here through the two diagonals on f7, and black does have a sharp response here. It's knight a5, but there is no problems. White plays queen b5, and now two options for black. One, c6, after which we have the move queen e5. Right, so here is a weakness on g7 this time, that if black takes on c4, queen g7, bishop f6, and queen h6 again gives white an advantage. So after queen b5, a better option for black is to take the knight. Now we take the knight on h6 here to destroy the structure of black's pawns on the king side. And after knight d6, there is queen e5. So we are pinning the pawn over here. G takes h6 is impossible, as the rook will fall. And this position is perfectly playable for black also. It's not that white has a crushing advantage over here. For instance, the move knight e4 gives black good chances. So it's a fairly messy position, right? Both-sided chance is perfectly playable. Another fine option here after knight c4, bishop takes h6 for black is the move g takes h6. We take on c4, he takes d4, c takes on d4. So again we're down a pawn, but black's pawn structure here on the king side is weak, and if black plans to castle king side, they will be met with some issues here on the g file. It's pretty easy to organize an attack here for white. And if black decides to castle queen side later on, then these two open files also pose good chances for initiative on the queen side. So here in this position, like I said, the more popular choice is the move d4, which is met by a few options here for black, mainly the three moves e takes d4, d6, or the main line knight a5. If e takes d4, now we can recapture, and the truth is, yes, now bishop b4 is a possible option, and this is the same as if we recaptured on d4 after the fifth move, bishop c5. Okay, this position is also perfectly fine here after bishop d2. Okay, but again, castle is possible, and now after d takes c3, queen d5 wins the game, right? f7 is not really defendable. After knight h6, bishop takes h6 and checkmate. But even here, like I said, c takes d4, right? Bishop b4 position is fine. If black chooses something like knight f6, then both e5 and d5 give white a good play. For instance, after e5, black can choose d5, we take on f6, and now it may seem like white will end up a piece. If black takes on c4, right, we're going to take on the e7 and white is winning. Black does have a way here to get away. So what do you think the move should be here for black? Okay, so it's bishop b4, check. Now bishop d2, d takes c4, we take on g7, rook g8, bishop b4, knight b4, castles, again with a very nice compensation. Same old story, black king discastled, right? I don't have to talk too much about this position. Another option here for black is d6, after which queen b3, knight a5, bishop f7, king f8, and now white's queen is under attack, and if we move away, the bishop will fall. So what do you think white can do here in this position? We play queen a4, not queen b5 with the same idea, because that would be met with c6, right? So pawn is attacking the queen, exposing here black's queen, which defends the knight on a5, and we would end up down a piece. So we play queen a4, king f7, queen a5. Again, the position is more pleasant for white because of our old reason, black king. And like I said, the main line, knight a5, now leaves white with 4 options. Well, actually it's 3, as one of those options, bishop f7, is a dubious continuation which may only look logical, but this is not a very sound sacrifice, because in the variation king f7, knight e5, now the careful king f8, because if the king e8, and queen h5 possibly could give some chances here, but king f8, queen f3, knight f6, and now let's say Knight d3, trying to get here the piece back, is met with d6. Now after e5, black takes, and bishop g4. Right, so white is also lagging in development in this variation. Weak knight on d3, and black is left with an advantage. That's why I wouldn't really play bishop f7 in that position. But there are other options. There is the move knight e5, bishop d3, or bishop e2. For instance, after knight e5, knight c4, knight c4, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight e3, queen a5, castles, knight f6. I am following a fairly recent game from 2010, a very encouraging game for aspiring Evans Gambit players. Castles, bishop d2, queen h5. In this position, played between two grandmasters, Robson and Perlstein, black collapsed after white's move. What do you think that move is? Knight d5, and turns out that the game is over and black resigned here after knight d5. Right, so we're deflecting here the defender of the queen. If knight takes on d5, the queen is gone. If the queen goes somewhere or captures queen on d1, then knight e7, king h8, rook d1, we end up a piece. And there's the heavy threat, knight f6. Okay, so black cannot really do anything here. Obviously, black does have an improvement on the way. The move queen d8 gives black good chances here in this position. Here in this position, like I said, white can also choose bishop d3. He takes d4, c takes d4, d5, takes, queen d5, and castles. Now knight f6 and rook e1. So we're putting some pressure here on the bishop, making it impossible for black to castle. What do you think happens after the seemingly logical bishop e6? So we play rook e5, and turns out that the piece is gone, which is gonna take on a5. So instead, in this position, again, queen d8 is a better option. Now after bishop a3, white is again left with a nice compensation. White can also choose the move bishop e2 here on move 7. And now he takes d4, queen takes. So that's the idea of moving the bishop to e2 as opposed to d3. We're trying to capture on d4 with the queen. Watching the pawn here on g7, right? So if bishop d3, the idea is to recapture with the pawn, leaving the center. And bishop e2, we want to recapture with the queen, right? Both options perfectly playable. So queen d4, d6, queen takes g7, bishop f6, and queen g3. In this position, it happens so that white will typically castle kingside and black will castle queenside, leaving the typical opposite castles sharp play, where black will be trying to do something about the g file, focusing on the white king, and white is going to try to open the queen side, mainly here through the b file. Again, this position has been played many times with both-sided results, and that completes the move bishop e7. So this wraps up the theory of the Evans Gambit arising after the moves bishop c5 and bishop e7 on move 5. Thank you very much for listening. I'm about to proceed with the move bishop d6 and show you a practical game from the game Kasparov-Anand 1995. Thank you again.